Hi folks, welcome back to the channel. Colin here with more rock and roll, but today I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to talk about 10 books that have really helped me to become a guitar player over the years. Now, I've read many books, rock and roll, folk, blues, you name it, probably hundreds of books learning to play the guitar. I've also had fantastic guitar instruction over the years from people like Randy Richter and Adrian Woodward, who runs the channel, I think it's called Anyone Can Play Guitar. Both these guys gave me a lot of good tips, but I'd done a lot of guitar work before I started speaking to them, so some of this stuff predates the time that I had guitar instruction, most of it in fact. Some of it follows later. Anyway, let's get on with it. These are my top 10 guitar instruction books of all time. When I first started playing guitar, it was 1987, and I was living up in a place called Elgin, which is in the northeast of Scotland, and there was only one music shop in Elgin, and they had a very limited supply of books. But the books that they did have were very good, and The Complete Guitar Player was one. Now, if you are only going to read one book on guitar, I would recommend this one actually, to be honest. It's now in an omnibus edition and it doesn't cost too much. You can get it on Amazon. I'll put a link below. But the great thing about this book is that it teaches you all the kind of basic guitar techniques that you need to play if you're going to be singing and playing. And it also gives you a bit of background in classical music as well. So if you're into classical, that's great. But mostly it's folk kind of based sort of music. So there's a lot of Bob Dylan, Beatles, Donovan, Chris Christopherson, that kind of stuff, Simon and Garfunkel. Now, I don't know if they've updated the music since this was written. Probably they haven't actually, so it's a bit 60s, 70s, which probably makes sense when you contextualise it when I read it in the 1980s. But it's good stuff, and I've always found that the stuff that I learnt in this book stays with me all the way through my career as a guitar player. All the techniques I learnt. When I first got this book, it predates, there was no CDs or internet or anything like that, so the big challenge I had was finding out what the songs sounded like, but most of them are quite well known. There's a one or two dodgy ones in there. English Country Garden, I don't know why I picked that one, but it'll go through all the bass drum style, the finger picking style, all the strumming techniques, and it teaches you a little bit of classical stuff as well, which is really good. So that's my number one. Okay, book number two is kind of a follow-on from book number one. Having got on so well with The Complete Guitar Player, I then went for The Complete Blues and Ragtime Guitar Player, also by RUSS Shipton, which is still in print, I believe. Now, finding the songs, how they were meant to sound, was even more challenging than it was in the first book, because a lot of these, I wanted to play the blues and stuff like that, but I just couldn't get hold of the original songs. This was in the 80s, as I said before. There was much information available online. It wasn't internet, so I used to sort of learn these accompaniments. They were good because they were, a lot of the time they were tabbed out, so this sort of style, so you could sort of get a fairly accurate kind of authentic blues backing. And then I just used to make the tunes up to go with it. They gave you the words, but if I didn't know the tunes, I would just kind of make the tune up as I thought it would be. And I suppose in a way that was kind of like a little bit of songwriting experience as well. So that was quite good. I must go back, because I haven't looked at these books for many years. I must go back and just see what these songs are actually meant to sound like. But nevertheless, this developed my knowledge of chords, understanding how the chords are in sort of groups, the 1, 4, 5 chord progression, that kind of stuff. And it taught me how to play the blues. Certainly fingerstyle blues, not so much rock and roll, but very, very useful. So that's book number two. Moving on from the last book, I was getting more into the kind of finger picking blues styles. This would have been about 1990. And a lot of these guys were playing for many years before they were discovered. Mississippi John Hurt, I think, became a big star in the 1960s, and you know, it was later on in his life he was kind of a little bit weather beaten by the time he got famous. It was a guy called Alan Lomax went and found all these amazing guys in the south of America who'd been playing for many years. But the great thing about Mississippi John Hurt's music is it's so melodic. A lot of the blues stuff is a little bit kind of samey, if you like, but I really liked Mississippi John Hurt's songs because they're just good tunes, and the accompaniments are really good as well. So the great thing about this book is it tabs them all out, which is great, and it came with a little CD. Now I got this in about 1990, so I just got a wee CD player and I could actually listen to the tunes, so that was fantastic. I was also listening to people like Reverend Gary Davis. I managed to get hold of a tape of his stuff. It's difficult to get the blues stuff at that time in the UK. It was mainly kind of gospel sort of stuff that I was listening to, but I was also playing Gary Davis at that point in time as well. So that took me up to about 1990, and I recommend this book, The Music of Mississippi John Hurt by STEPHAN GROSSMAN. Okay, my next suggestion is this book, Play Guitar with the Beatles. Now, you might find this quite hard to believe, but in 1990 I hadn't really heard much of the Beatles music. As I say, you know, all that you heard was what was on the radio, so it was kind of like the big hits that you'd hear now and again, you know, Help and She Loves You and stuff like that. But there were so many great Beatles songs which were less publicised and less famous, and I started to get hold of their albums on cassette because I just had a little Walkman, and I couldn't believe it. Some of the songs that were that they'd recorded that I'd not heard before, they were just absolutely incredible, and the guitar work just came through to me, you know, as a guitar player learning, and they were just fantastic songs. So I got this book later on. I think this would have been later in the 90s, maybe later 90s I think it was, maybe early 2000s. And I couldn't believe it. Suddenly there was a period around about 2000 when every kind of band that you had liked up to that point, all their music came out on tablets or with CDs and stuff and backing tracks. And it just blew my mind because suddenly you could actually, you know, play all the pop music that you really liked note for note, which was that was very exciting at the time. Now we've got videos, we've got the internet, you know, this is no big deal now, but back in the late 90s that was a big one. So, and again, I think if you're learning guitar you've got to learn the Beatles, because the Beatles, you know, they did quite a lot to move the guitars forward in the 60s. Okay, so that's recommendation number 4. It's called Play Guitar with the Best of the Beatles, and it's by Wise Publications, and I'll put the link below. Okay folks, book number 5 is Guitar Chords, Blues You Can Use by John Ganapes, or Ganapes, I don't know what his name is, Ganapes. It's probably, apologies if you're watching, John, and I've said your name wrong. Anyway, this is a book which I refer to now and again. Once I got through the stage of being able to sort of play songs like the record and stuff like that, I began to get more interested in just understanding how the music worked and how it was made really, and what the rules were when you're constructing chords and solos and things like that. So I actually bought a few of these Blues You Can Use books. I don't know if they're still around, I assume they are still around. They weren't too bad. I have to say I did find some of the tunes were not exactly up my street, and I did find that I didn't really click with some of the theory. Not so much in the first books, but in this chord book I found that much more like I could get my head around it. So I was still at this point, this would have been about early 2000s, still trying to understand how soloing worked, how guitarists could make music and just play lead guitar. That hadn't been part of my background up until that point. I learned how to sort of finger pick and play kind of chordal type music, and I'd learned to play solos using tab, but I didn't really quite understand how they were made. So this was just the beginning really of me understanding how it all went together, and chords is a big part of it really, and as you get further into it you understand that chords is kind of what it's all about really, in fact, but more on that later. Anyway, that is book number 5, Blues Chords You Can Use by John GANAPES. So book number 6 was given to me by my girlfriend at the time, who is now my wife, thankfully. Great book. She had a good idea to get me this book, which is called 25 Great Guitar Solos. It's by a guy called Chad Johnson. Now, the interesting thing about this book, you can see it's got lots of guitar players on the front cover. It's not one that I would have naturally been drawn to, if I'm honest, because I just not too sure if I like the graphics. Now that's a very shallow reflection of me, I suppose, as a guitarist, but there you go, that's how I work. But actually, when I got this book I was delighted when I looked into it, because what it does is it kind of shows the development of lead guitar playing from the 1950s up until kind of round about the late 80s. So it goes from sort of Rock Around the Clock to Sweet Child of Mine by Guns N' Roses, and it just picks out all the kind of iconic solos during that period of time, which is pretty much the key time for guitar playing, I think. I mean, we have had further development and innovation of how the instrument's used, but to me this is the kind of classic period of the guitar, when the technology was still evolving and people were still finding out new ways to make sounds with it. But the great thing, what he does is he does a little synopsis of each song, talks a little bit, gives you a little bit of biography of the artist, talks about the equipment that they used, and talks about kind of like the underlying musical ideas within the song. And some of these took me a long time to actually, as I got more kind of musically literate, shall we say, I gradually got to understand what they were talking about. So it's probably for a beginner not that easy to get to grips with, but as you get further on in your playing, it's really good. And I've not done all, every solo is tabbed out, so you can play it like the record, and it explains musically what's happening before and gives you a few tips as to how to actually play the stuff. Now, I've not played all of them because I guess not all of these solos are really kind of what I want to do on the guitar, but maybe I should do that. Maybe that's something I should do as a little challenge to myself. But I've played quite a few of them and I've learnt a lot from it. Now, I suppose because I'm a kind of chronological sort of guy, I started at the beginning of the book, and that kind of got me into 50s music, would you believe? Now, a lot of people sort of criticise me in a way, because they say, oh, you're a guy that's gone to 50s music later in life, so you're not the real deal type of style. But I'm just a musician, and apologies if I don't have like 25, 50 years of kind of being brought up in rock and roll, but I've gravitated to it through learning to play the blues, and I find it's a style that I kind of get on quite well with, so that's why I play it. It's nothing, I'm not really a kind of lifestyle die-in-the-wool kind of person. It's more just about the music, really, to be honest. But anyway, that's kind of how I got into rock and roll. It was Hound Dog. They only do the first solo in this book. I've done a video which has the second solo. As I progressed, I managed to get my ears going, and now I just can listen to stuff and play it off the record type of thing. But that is something that evolves over time, the more that you play and the more that you learn. Okay, so that is book number 6, 25 Great Guitar Solos. Okay folks, hang on to your hats. Book number 7 is Guitar Theory for Dummies by someone called A. Wiley Brand. What can I say about this book? It's not one that I would recommend if you're wanting to, stay awake at night or something like that, but it's boring but important sort of stuff, and I've I have found this book to be quite useful. If I'm honest, the thing that I found most useful was on page, and I've marked it so I can watch it again, 248. It kind of made the book, it paid for itself just there really, where it talks about how you can use a pentatonic scale over a blues chord progression, or a blues scale over a blues chord progression in any key. And the thing about the pentatonic scale that's so amazing is it's only got 5 notes. So that means that because you've got a major and a minor version of it, it takes away all the tricky notes that would clash when you're soloing in different keys. So you can actually move that scale up and down the neck and play over the chord changes, and it always sounds really good. And you don't really need to know much more than that really. And when you're soloing, it's hard to actually consciously think about what note you're going to play next, but if you can actually be confident that whatever note it is that you're going to play, as long as you play it with intention and a little bit of style, shall we say, then it's going to sound good. And if you're interested in finding out more about that, just drop me a comment in this video and I'll make a video about it. That is my recommendation, book number 7, Guitar Theory for Dummies. It's not that exciting, but it does make a difference. Okay, my next book, book number 8, is The Guitars of Elvis. I got this around about, it must have been about 2013, 2014. At that time I was getting guitar lessons from a man called Randy Richter, who's just the most amazing rockabilly guitar player. If you're interested in rockabilly, I'm sure you know all about him. I was very lucky, I got guitar lessons from him for about 5 years, can you believe? And he taught me all the great solos. So I'm always eternally grateful for that. Since then, of course, I've kept going and I've sort of got into it a bit more myself and I've found my own way. But if I hadn't had that background, I wouldn't have probably been able to do that. So thanks and respect to Randy Richter. And I got this book. I've never really kind of spent a lot of time studying this book, but it's kind of just always there because the transcriptions are pretty good. And I always think if I ever kind of forgot how to play something, because when you learn a lot of new stuff and you don't play the old stuff, you do kind of forget stuff. So for me it's kind of like just, oh right, great, if I ever need to learn how to play that, or if I completely forget, I can always go back. Having said that, since I started my YouTube channel, I now document everything that I learn anyway, so it's not so much of an issue. But for me, Scotty Moore was a big influence. His guitar playing, I think, has been pretty important in the development of rock and roll and subsequent styles later as well. And Elvis played with lots of great guitar players, Hank Garland, James Burton, great people. So this is my recommendation, number 8, The Guitars of Elvis. Okay, my next book, recommendation number 9, is Rockabilly Guitar by Fred Sokolow. I imagine he must be of Eastern European descent, perhaps. Apologies if I got your name wrong, Fred. I'm not very good with names. This is published by Hal Leonard. Now, it's quite a slim sort of book, this, but there's quite a lot of interesting value in it, and it really does, I think, a pretty good job of giving you the basics of rockabilly guitar. Nicely done. I mean, rockabilly guitar, I think, is quite an interesting style because it embodies, essentially it's the blues with a bit of extra jazziness thrown in. But a lot of what it is quite generic. So this book's quite good at actually teaching you what the sort of generic principles are of rockabilly guitar. Again, it helps if you actually know the songs. So that, that's a bit of a downer if you don't. But it's much easier to find them these days than it used to be. The other thing, it does talk about soloing and stuff like that. Now, I found that although I think technically he is right in what he's saying, he doesn't actually explain it in a way that you can actually use it that easily yourself to create your own solos. So that's why I found that other book, the Music Theory for Dummy books, that it was number 7, to be quite helpful. And sometimes that's the thing, you've got to take bits of different books and put them together, and then you start to see the whole picture. I don't know why that is. I don't know why you can't seem to find all the information in one book, but it just seems to be the way it is. Anyway, so that's my recommendation for book number 9, Rockabilly Guitar by Frank Sokolow. Okay folks, brings us to the final book of this video, and the last book I'm going to talk about is 100 Rockabilly Licks for Guitar by a guy called DARREL. Now if you're into rockabilly in any way, I'm sure that you will be very familiar with DARREL, handsome young man there. I've been to see him playing live, he's very, very good, and he is kind of one of the foremost guitar players in the UK at the moment, as far as I can gather, and therefore very, very well positioned to talk about rockabilly guitar and write a book about it. So I've had this book for about a year or 2 years, maybe a year. It was published in 2021, so yeah, it must be about a year ago I bought it, fairly soon after it was published. Very keen, and I find it to be quite helpful, very good. Again, if I didn't have the musical theory, which I got from, you know, gritting my teeth and getting through some of that other stuff, I'm not sure if I would have been able to kind of access the underlying musical principles as easily as I did when I came to read this book. As you can see, what I've done is I've actually overmarked a lot of the stuff so that I could actually interpret kind of what he was doing, so that I could then use that in other contexts and just get my head around what he was talking about. But some of the key principles that he does outline are bang on. You know, this idea of a kind of rockabilly scale. Now I've got a rockabilly scale that I use as well, which is almost the same. I don't know if you can see that this here. Mine's slightly different because I tend to just play over 4 frets, 1 finger per fret, and when I'm teaching it, that's the way I kind of teach it. So when he's writing off, he's adding in those extra notes, but I would tend to leave them till kind of later and maybe teach those as kind of part of position 2 of the pentatonic scale, and then explain how the 2 scales go together and so on. But yeah, absolutely bang on, good stuff. Again, if you don't know like how you can use that over different chord progressions, you might not kind of immediately grasp how useful that information is. It's actually incredibly helpful, but again, it's not always clear to the reader just exactly what you can do with these ideas, and you tend to get stuck in one key because you've learnt it in one key and they don't explain it. But sorry, taking that aside, you know, I think the way this book's structured is very, very good. He breaks it down, so he gives you sort of key signature licks, and then he talks about kind of sort of rhythm stuff, and then he gives you kind of licks that are sort of signature licks for particular artists as well. So pretty good. Would you be able to play rockabilly if you just read that book? I'm not so sure if you would, if I'm honest. So again, it's like giving you bits of information but not the whole picture. But you know, that's just kind of how it is, and you have to sort of look around and put it all together yourself, or find a good teacher. That's the other thing. So that's it folks, that is my 10 essential books for learning to play rock and roll guitar. I'll see you next time.